You're listening to theoutdoorstation.co.uk.
How does a squash player become one of Britain's most influential kayakers? I'm Simon Willis, and in this podcast for SeaKayakRoutes.com, Nigel Dennis skims us through his extraordinary career. One of his most recent paddles was around South Georgia. You can hear more about that from Jeff Allen in the podcast library. Here, Nigel Dennis tells us about his expeditions, his range of boats, and what first got him into a sea kayak.
I started kayaking back in '79. I was actually part of a cliff rescue team then, and I'd recently given up squash because all my life I've played squash rackets and I played for the Welsh B team. So I was looking for something else to do, and we were looking down around Gogarth Bay and we actually saw 2 or 3 sea kayakers. So Tom and I thought, well, that's something to do. So we talked about it in the pub afterwards, and we decided to get 2 sea kayaks, but we needed a goal. So we sort of set ourselves a goal of paddling around Britain on that day, and we decided to give ourselves 2 years to learn. Started ringing around. The only person that I felt took us seriously was Frank Goodman, and so we ended up ordering 2 Nordkaps, and that's where we started. And Tom and I actually probably had more fun in the learning because we taught ourselves. Back in those days, there weren't the coaches that we knew anyway.
How did you teach yourself?
The hard way, really, or the easy way. We started off in Kayak Bay. Well, no, my first paddle was on the inland sea in about 1.5 feet of water with a dog walking behind me. And I've got a photograph of that somewhere. And then we progressed to the harbour in Kayak Bay, and I think a passerby jumped in at one point because Tom had capsized and couldn't get out his boat and what have you, and it was a bit like, I don't know, everything seemed to happen to Tom. He got picked up by a helicopter once, he got picked up by a fishing boat, and we just basically took every day as it
So did you get known by these people as those 2 idiots who are learning to sea kayak? We've got to keep rescuing them again.
Not really. It's what we didn't actually know about were tidal races and overfalls. And there's a tiny little race just outside of Kayak as you go up towards Amloch. And I remember the first day we ventured. Well, not the first day, but in the early days when we first ventured out the harbour, we got stuck in this little race that we wouldn't even look at these days, and that gave us some major problems, and we wondered what that was. And it was just step by step, really.
So was there no information you could go to? Was there no way you could learn? Because people had been putting kayaks on the sea around here for a long time. I mean, 1930s, the canoe boys.
I'm sure there was, but we didn't really think about looking or going anywhere, really. We went to...
How old were you at this time?
I was actually about 25, so I was quite late to sea kayaking. And I think we just enjoyed teaching ourselves and poodling, to be honest with you.
Did you ever try and do any work, any research?
No, not really, not at all.
So the first boat you sat in was a Nordkap?
Yeah, I mean, we rang round to talk to people and I say, ask people advice, but the first person we thought that was genuine about wanting to help was Frank Goodman, so that's where we ordered the boats.
So 2 years later, when you decided, right, did you decide we're trained up enough, we can go and do this?
Well, we'd set the date, really, and that's what we were going to do. So there were 2 of us, and at the same time, Paul Caffin from New Zealand contacted Frank Goodman and said, look, I want to paddle around Great Britain, will you help? And Frank said, well, I've agreed to help 2 local lads, but why don't you talk to them? So we must have spent about an hour on the phone to each other.
Could have been competition, couldn't it? Or did you not think like that?
Didn't really think like that. It could have been, I suppose it could have been competition, but no, we were just sort of interested to see if we'd all got on, really. So we spent about an hour on the phone with Paul Caffin, And at the end, we decided, well, why don't we join forces? So that's what we did. So Paul came over, and by that time, I'd sort of organised all the. I mean, we had Subaru, had a support vehicle from Subaru, and Texaco had agreed to pay the fuel, and so on and so forth. So Paul came over with Leslie, who operated the support vehicle. And the three of us set off, and unfortunately Tom sort of bailed out on day 2, and then we ended up completing the first circumnavigation after it was 65 paddling days, 85 days in all.
What was it like for a 27-year-old by then, wouldn't you? Yeah. What was it like? I mean, setting yourself out on and actually doing that. I mean, was it daunting, or was it just one of those things? Yeah, I can take this in my stride. Cockiness of youth.
I'd set my targets on doing it, so I was sort of, I didn't think about not doing it, to be honest with you. Obviously in those days, I mean, Paul Caffin's a well-known sea kayaker now.
Was he well known there as well?
He'd already done some expeditions, yes, he'd paddled around New Zealand,
yeah.
But he obviously hadn't done Australia, and I don't think he'd done Japan, and he hadn't done Alaska, so he's also sort of carried on and done some major stuff. But Paul is, I suppose it was almost like 2 solo paddlers in a way. I mean, obviously we were paddling together, but sometimes we could have been a quarter of a mile apart. But the interesting thing was, as the weather sort of deteriorated, we both sort of paddled joined up, and that's in rough conditions. We were pretty close to each other.
So it was handy there being 2 of you?
Oh yeah, it was definitely handy there's being 2 of it. I think there's a completely different mindset if you're doing something like this solo. And equally, when it was getting too rough, we almost both, identical times, would turn and say, right, let's head in.
Dodgiest moment?
I think for me, probably Freshwater West down in South Wales, mainly because we hadn't expected the surf and size of surf there. But I think I think all the decisions were sort of reasonably sound decisions, and although we were out in some rough stuff, we weren't caught out. So I think.
Ever get bored?
No, I think if you get bored, you probably wouldn't do it. I think what you actually do is switch off. You end up thinking about all sorts of things, and I mean, I think on that trip I even fell asleep paddling. Woke up pretty quickly, but I think I can remember, sort of waking up with just zoning out. And I think that's what you do. You just switch off, and you're in a world of your own half the time.
Your record stayed for quite a while, didn't it?
I think it was last year or the year before, Phil, Barry and Harry completed the trip, and I think they did it in a day quicker, I think. But there's a little bit of controversy because I think they actually did more paddling days than we did, but we did less paddling days. But overall, yes, they beat the record by about a day.
And if you want to listen to Barry Shaw talk about that, I spoke to him on the symposium on Mull, and that's in the podcast library at seakayakroots.com. But getting back to your trip, did that set the tone and tenor for your life, do you think?
Yes, I think it did, because up to then I'd spent a lot of time, all my life was playing squash. I used to train virtually every day and play matches, every week. And it was like a big void had gone. And I mean, I actually went off sea kayaking for about 5 years, and I went into windsurfing and did very little sea kayaking that period of time. And then I sort of drifted back into kayaking. So
when and how did you decide to make it your business?
That sort of happened. It happened by chance, really.
Was it the centre or the boat? What came first?
No, the centre came first. I mean, after paddling around Great Britain, I got back, and in those days I was sort of in architecture. I got back, and the company I was working for wasn't there anymore. So I basically didn't have a job. So I just thought, well, maybe I should try and start a centre. I mean, again, I didn't know a lot about that. So what I did is I actually went to Sheffield and I worked in a centre for a year just to find the ins and outs. And then
did you tell them that's what you were doing?
No, not really. and then we bought an old school, converted the school, and started the first centre. So that's where all that started. Yeah.
How did the boats come along?
Boats came along after sort of running courses and instructing for quite some time. There was a trailer load of boats outside. And
which boats did you use?
I always used Valley Canoe products. I always used Frank's boats. And there was about, I suppose we had about £25,000 worth of boats on the trailer. And I thought, well, maybe we should just try and build a school boat. So I initially said to Frank that I'd like to take the Anna Scooter and change it a little bit. And I talked to Frank, and Frank said that was, he said he agreed. But then he decided that they would do it, and out came the pintail. So I used the pintail for a little bit, and then I just decided that I'd quite like to do our own boat anyway. So then the Romany was born, and I'd only intended building a fleet of boats a year, and then selling them off and then replacing them for the centre use.
But it's a big step between running a centre and then deciding you're going to go and build some boats.
It all happened actually by accident, really, because as I said, I had these boats and we just had a little shed at the bottom of the centre, and we just started, I asked Mike if he would build some boats for me, because he actually had a workshop at the centre.
This is Mike?
Mike Webb.
Yeah.
He now
making Rockpool.
Rockpool, yeah. And so Mike had the little shed at the centre because he used to build windsurfing boards, and he hadn't built boats either then. So, and then for a period of time we actually built some of Valley's Nordcaps for them. The Romany was the first boat to have the keyhole cockpit, and it had the bulkhead immediately behind the cockpit with the day hatch. So all these features were sort of the first standard in a sea kayak. There were day hatches around, but nobody put them in as standard. So there was a gentleman called Stan Schladdock who used to import Valley into North America, and Stan said to me, "Well, can I have 2 or 3 boats, and I'll take them back to America?" So that's what he did, and then it just literally snowballed from there. So now we've got a sort of fairly big factory, employs 17 people, and
So how do you see your boats fitting in almost to this great old history of sea kayaking? Gino Watkins going right through this whole way. I mean, in what way do you see them as an evolution from that?
Yeah, I think all sea kayaks they evolve. And I think it's very interesting when you travel around to places like Easter Island, the west coast of Ireland, and you see the traditional boats, not sea kayaks, but fishing boats. They've evolved, and a lot of them are good sea boats, and they're very similar. The sea kayaks have evolved, and I think what I'd like to think ours have perhaps done is become user-friendly. We can all design boats that go faster, boats that do specific things much better, but there's no point in having boats that are very fast that 5% of the paddlers
fall out of.
Yeah, or 10% fall out of, or whatever. So I've tried really to create a range of kayaks, because I do believe that big people need different, big kayaks or different features of kayaks, and small people need smaller kayaks. So we try to sort of not personalise the kayaks, but put a range of kayaks in place that do fit, as opposed to one kayak fitting all.
And the name was Nigel Dennis Kayaks. You're wearing a T-shirt that says, a polo shirt that says something different now. What's behind all this?
Yeah, well, basically the name Nigel Dennis Sea Kayaks was actually changed. It's the same company name, and we changed it to Sea Kayaking UK. We've entered a period where we are doing boats for other people. So rather than every boat that we do, being Nigel Dennis Kayaks, the company is Sea Kayaking UK, and they make kayaks now designed by Nigel Dennis, but we also make other kayaks. Like we're actually making a 40-foot Hawaiian racing canoe as well.
So not a lot of demand for that here, presumably.
Well, no, not a lot of demand, but there's 3 or 4 on order. Yeah. So basically,
is that because they're going around the world now?
No, they're actually in the UK. But all the sea kayaks are going, they're going far and wide now.
What do you make of this explosion in the popularity of sea kayaking? And have you any idea what's behind it?
I don't know if it's an explosion or a sort of just a natural growth. I don't think it's a boom and bust like we've seen with windsurfing and skateboarding and things like that. I think the attraction of the sport is, well, the average age for sea kayaking is probably 25 up to 75 and even higher in some cases. I think it's a sport that you can do at any level. You can do it, quite easily at 60, and it's a sport that appeals to all. And I think, the sea's one of the last areas we can roam. There's no access problems, and there's a lot to explore. And I think with more leisure time, more money, I think it's a natural way forward for a lot of people.
Speaking to some of the people here, some of the manufacturers here, they were saying to me that America is really starting to get turned on now to British kayaks, Welsh kayaks. Are you finding that at all?
No, I don't think that's quite correct. I think we've turned America. When I say we, I don't just mean us. I mean Valley. And traditionally, when we initially went into America all those years ago, everything, the boats were bigger, everything had rudders. And to a certain extent, although in whitewater they were, we've always looked up to them. In sea kayaking, it's been the other way around. A lot of areas in America have very stable weather, so consequently, equipment and kayaks hadn't evolved as much because we've got to cope with an ever-changing weather. So there was a lot of resistance to skegs, etc., etc. So over the years, I think we've just basically proved that the kayaks work, and they've actually come round to our way of thinking. And now there are so many good paddlers in America. I mean, the sport's progressed leaps and bounds.
They also get turned onto the BCU thing, don't they?
They have got turned onto the BCU because the BCU system, although it's going through major changes at the moment, the old system, if we can call it that, has evolved over a long period of time and well respected. And I think that's, that's what they've wanted up to now.
One thing I noticed with the outdoor industry, which I knew a bit better than the kayak industry, was the need for constant improvement. Every year the new rucksack would come out and it would have a little new toggle on, or they'd change the colours, or they'd do something like that. Is there a danger that sea kayaks, they start tweaking and we start getting cosmetic stuff and it's just all to hit price points and what have you? And I wonder how happy you are, because you don't seem to be doing this. You seem, you've got the Romney, there's the Explorer, and you kind of know what you're getting. To what extent do you think you need to keep a heritage, and to what extent do you need to keep the line fresh?
Well, it's a constant battle to keep the line fresh. We can do that by improving comfort, tweaking with designs and things. I wouldn't like to see, I don't think there's any need to try and bring out completely new concepts and designs, because if designs work, I think that is proof in itself. I think that currently there's possibly a split. There's definitely more of a park and play in sea kayaking, where people are going into bigger water, tidal races, overfalls. So there will definitely be a split or in design, perhaps away from there'll be one school that is park and play that will need high performance in tidal races, and the others will be the more traditional expedition kayakers. I think we'll stay perhaps more on the traditional expedition kayakers, but even our boats will have to perform in adverse, and they do perform in adverse conditions.
But there's not a new one coming into your range, is there, for that?
There's not a new one coming into the range specifically for tidal races and overfalls. No, I'd like to think that they all handle reasonably well in tidal races and overfalls. But once you start to go too specialist, then I think your market narrows down. And it's always been my aim to produce a range of kayaks for Mr. Average, really.
That's Nigel Dennis. Check out his boat at Sea Kayaking UK. And check out the podcast library at seakayakroots.com for many more interesting podcasts, and the one by Jeff Allen about his trip with Nigel Dennis around South Georgia. I'm Simon Willis. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.
Find out how easy it is to subscribe to all our free programmes. Visit our website at theoutdoorstation.co.uk.